Several of my friends and acquaintances now call themselves pagan. I wanted to talk about, for those who don't understand, why so many people now feel drawn towards some sort of neo-paganism.
Hello, my name is Jacob Todson, and welcome back to The Wisdom of Odin. Today, we're going to be talking about America and why I believe America needs paganism. Naturally, I was raised in the church, mostly Presbyterian and Baptist, and after the age of 18, realized the church wasn't for me, and I just explored many different beliefs, but ultimately, it's always returned to nature.
They are diagnosing real problems that are becoming manifest, but I think they're getting the solution wrong.
Hi, witchlings. My witchcraft and my paganism are something that I always kind of kept separate.
They've realized modernity is a lie.
If you've just started getting into the world of nature-based spirituality, then you might have come across so many different terms, from Wicca to pagan, heathen, green witches, forest witches, hedge witches.
Modernity is a web of lies that's coming unwoven around us. I'm going to talk to you like you're an intelligent person, that you're not an ignoramus. So stick with me. People are looking for connection with nature. They're looking for something real. They're not happy living in concrete cities of ugly architecture boxed in with consumerism and rampant corporatocracy, technocracy, where we are forced to eat processed food, wear processed clothes, barely get ahead in life with no meaning, no purpose. People are looking for their roots. They're looking for something real before all the nonsense. Pagan is a word that's a sort of a catch-all phrase for multiple local religions, cultures of the past. If you think about it from a cultural point of view, what holds us together as a culture now? Now, some have differentiated between the word civilization, say Western civilization, and the various cultures within it. Every country or local group of people can have distinct culture within a larger civilization. But what is the unifying culture of the United States right now, or of Europe? There is none. It's been systematically, deliberately eroded, torn down. It's been eclipsed by giant corporations, globalism, modern philosophies that are very abstract and not rooted in the local and the real and in nature. Not only do we not cook our food, we don't even grow our food or kill our food. We're so detached from nature, and we work ourselves long hours, seemingly for nothing, and we usually just detach ourselves into video game worlds, to digital fantasy worlds, to escape reality. And this, I think, is the absolute naivete of the atheist movement, especially the new atheist movement of about 20 years ago.
So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity.
The idea that if you could just get rid of religion, that not only that if you got rid of religion that we would be more reasonable and kind and charitable and scientific, because we have not become those things, but that you could get rid of religion because people are by nature religious beings. It's what human beings are. So in the decline of Christianity in the West, what you've seen instead is the resurgence of other religions like African witchcraft, tribal magic, European people trying to return to their ancestral roots. But I'd like to offer a thought as to why I think that going back to paganism, so-called, is really the wrong path. I love Germanic mythology. I love mythology in general, but the saga of the Volsungs I love. In fact, after Mass this morning, I'm a Catholic, riding out here, I listened to Wagner's The Death of Siegfried, the Götterdämmerung, which is the death twilight of the gods, where in his epic opera, the Germanic gods, Wotan and such, face Ragnarok, they face the apocalypse, the end of their world. And they place their hopes, in a way, in this hero. But of course, the hero dies, and Ragnarok takes place. There's an old poem written by Anglo-Saxons, and see, even recording this now, I'm out in nature, and still modern airplanes are flying over. You can't escape it. This Anglo-Saxon poem was essentially about they're living in the ruins of what was the Roman Empire. And they're realizing that there was a greater civilization in the past, but that they have lost the knowledge to be able to build the things that the Romans did. The Anglo-Saxons, for all their merits, were not the Romans. They were not able to recreate the world of the Romans, which is a lost world to them. I think that's similar to what people are seeing now. So even in the days of the week, people are realizing so much that's been lost. And you can't replace it with Hot Topic and anime and consumer products. These corporations want to sell you fake culture to find fake meaning. And you can't replace the real things that have been lost with this nonsense, with the vapidness of modern society. Wednesday is Votansdag. It's Odin's Day. Thursday is Thor's Day. My critique is this. Well, it's really two or three. But the first is that neo-pagans, one, really aren't thoroughly pagan. There was a historian called Tom Holland, and he said something like, and he's an atheist, but he's trying to point this out to atheists, that we swim in Christian waters, we breathe Christian air, and so much about not just the external things, but the things deeply rooted in our psyche are deeply, thoroughly Christian, influenced by Christianity, including atheists. In fact, the less Christian we become, the more our cultures inside of Western Civ collapse. Now, what's starting now is people trying to return to neo-paganism and doing, some type of ritual. I think there was both truth and demonic levels of error in some of the old pagan religions. So in the worship of Odin, which is called by different names in Germanic peoples, Wotan, there was the belief in courage, there was the belief in fate, there was the belief in nobility. There were beautiful, good things about that. I think even foreshadowings of a future truth. But sometimes I think that real spiritual beings that are not our friends get involved in these things and cause humans to dehumanize themselves. Take for sake of argument that we are created in the image of God, and that these daemons, these evil daemons, these demons, hate God and therefore hate you. If you look in pagan history, you'll see people sacrificing men to Odin, sacrificing human beings to Odin. You see civilizations like the Mayans, which probably had a great deal of truth, that eventually started having an assembly line of death to cut out people's hearts, to sacrifice them to their gods. Paganism today is not real paganism. It's a consumerist, there's industries building up with this. It's half Christianized, but it's not real pagans that can revisit the rituals of the past. And my concern is that the more people go down this way, the more people will attempt to reinstitute some of the darker, violent, demonic rituals of the pagan past. Now, I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying that's potentially around the corner. But my major critique is this. This is a book by one of my favorite philosophers. His name is Roger Scruton, An Intelligent Person's Guide to Modern Culture. And he never got himself to believe in God, but his life's work was obsessed with the loss of the sacred, which characterizes modernity. I think if you look at the great poems of modernity like T.S. Eliot, his Wasteland, or even post-modernity like Philip Larkin, you'll see this general sense of mourning what was lost, but also optimism about what could be. But I would argue that what could be has turned out to be sort of a nightmare. But he says this, I'll just say it bluntly, I think that modern neo-pagans are blaming Christianity for the real problems they see. But the reality is they should be blaming the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, of course, is the ideological, philosophical, cultural movement immediately after the Reformation in the West that tried to lean into giant abstract principles, science, democracy, law, the universal brotherhood of mankind and reason. And this was the beginnings of the erosion of local cultures. He says, by the time of Kant's words, the Enlightenment was at its crisis. Herder's advocacy of culture against civilization was in part a reaction to Kant's view of human nature, as formed from a single pattern and fulfilled in a single way through reason, freedom, and law. The universalism advocated by Kant seemed to Herder to threaten all that is most precious in the human soul, namely the local, the loyal, and the rooted. I think those things are what pagans are looking for, as opposed to globalism run by a small elite, influenced by overpowerful corporations, and that have absolutely eroded and stolen cultures for profit. Then comes the retreat of the sacred. The gods and saints cease to haunt their shrines. The old ceremonies lose their divine authority. The sacred texts are put into question, and doubt is cast on all but the most abstract versions of religious doctrine. This process had begun with the Reformation and Luther's priesthood of all believers, but it took a peculiar turn during the 18th century as people began to look on sacred texts and stories as purely metaphors. The abstract deism of Voltaire and Kant sees religion as an unmediated relation between God and self. Knowledge of God comes through our own reasoning powers and through the exercise of moral choice, without the aid of images, texts, or rituals. So to find the line between deism and atheism is a fine one. I think that, I say this regretfully, I was a Protestant Christian. I was a minister. But I do think, no offense to my Protestant friends, I don't think we knew this, but the Reformation was, people don't always see the long-term consequences of their actions and their choices. That set us on the path to secularization, and it really took root in the Enlightenment. And in trying to lean into the universal brotherhood of mankind, abstract principles of reason and philosophies, though I respect philosophers like Immanuel Kant for trying in some sense to preserve the sacred that was rapidly being lost in his day. I think all this set us on the path to atheism. And I don't just mean people who call themselves atheists, I mean cultural atheism. Our buildings are atheist, they're nihilist, they're consumerist, they're utilitarian. We don't have feasting halls anymore, we have consumerist restaurants. We don't even have mom and pop shops, we have giant chains with processed food. The modern world doesn't have feasts at all. The closest thing we have is a Super Bowl. We're not allowed to have local culture because the moment you say, this is my local culture, well, you're probably going to be called a bigot. And I've seen this from some people who associate with pagans, especially Celts. I've watched some of these folks living in Ireland and Scotland and these places. The globalist powers that force immigration, they don't just allow careful immigration, they're forcing people with very different cultures into these places that have limited space and limited people. And well, they're blaming globalism for it. There's nothing local or rooted about this. By the way, this is one of the reasons Karl Marx, his ideas caught on, because he was sort of promising that he could restore the human self. I think Freud had some of his own ideas about this, but it's failed. So here's a few things. Please consider it. One, I had no idea how deeply the world today is shaped by not the conversion of Europe, of Ireland, of Scotland or Spain or France to Catholicism, to the Catholic Christian faith, but things like the Kulturkampf in Germany. Kulturkampf means cultural struggle in German. Hitler had his Mein Kampf, his struggle, but there were culture struggle laws enacted to limit the powers and the influence, not just politically, but culturally, of the historic Christian faith in Germany in the 1800s. It wasn't historic Christianity that drove the sacred from the places where we live, that made our world lifeless and colorless and flavorless. It was modernism that did that. Not everything in the ancient pagan belief systems was true, but some of it was. And those are the things that I think foreshadowed and were fulfilled in historic Christianity. It's why so many of our ancestors became Christian. In the book of Malachi, it was prophesied that one day Gentiles, people around the world, non-Jews, would offer incense to the one true God. And this is what Gentile, pagan, formerly pagan people who became Christians saw fulfilled in themselves. Because historic Christianity has holy things and holy places and holy people. Things that are very real and natural, like the family and marriage, became more taken over by the abstract principles of the secular state and not local customs, a belief in a covenant between man and woman and God himself. The French Revolution, Henry VIII, began confiscating monasteries by the hundreds, forcing people essentially who wanted to remain celibate, rejecting the idea of a priesthood, forcing people to get married or leave the monasteries, taking their land, and this secularized the West. Historic Christian art from our ancestors was stripped down by violent, idiotic mobs. With the Enlightenment, we did see progress that was already being made, by the way, but continued progress in the sciences towards the transistor or, air travel, refrigeration. But how much was lost? We lost more than we gained. The Enlightenment focused not on the divine, but on the natural, to the point where for so long, people in the West thought that the natural, the material, is all there is. And this has left us insanely depressed. So people just try to find happiness in too much sex, too much food, substance abuse, material things, when really so many people now are waking up that there might be something deeper, something more. When I was struggling with the Christian faith and the belief that the way of thinking that I think is the most stupid and ignorant and naive, but also the one that I've related to the most deeply is atheism, which I think is almost synonymous with nihilism. I don't think you can really escape. You're going to wind up with a thinly veiled nihilism with atheism, and that's what culture has. But I remember studying the mythologies of the Romans, the Greeks, the Germans, and just found them beautiful, but also there's some pretty gross, dark stuff. But there was truth. There was truth in those myths. And Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had a conversation. Lewis was an atheist, and he converted to Christianity. He was converted by his Catholic friend Tolkien. But what he saw was that the myths that he loved were something like the transcendent. They were immaterial things that had deep truths in them. But that in a person, these immaterial truths met actual history. And this is what I believe. The gods of the past, some of them seem to me to be absolutely demonic. I don't mean that as an insult to you, but some of the stories are absolutely wonderful. Some of the stories are awful, and you know this if you read any of them. Just disgusting, demonic levels of evil and violence and debauchery. Because I think so often the gods, not all of them with the exception of perhaps Athena, many of the gods are, to borrow a phrase from Nietzsche, human, all too human. These seem to be amplifications of the human condition. If I were to invent gods, they would probably look quite a bit like me. I think this is what the gods are. On the other hand, you have God in the Christian tradition that is not the same order of being as Odin or Zeus. He is not a man who lives locally in these woods or in this mountain. However, he is, contrary to the modernists, what St. Paul said on Athens. He quoted a pagan poet, quoted two if I recall, Aratus and another, and he said, "In him we live and move and have our being." Now that poem was actually originally written by a pagan referring to Zeus. But what Paul was saying is that, no, this pagan poem encapsulates something that is real and true. Zeus isn't just a man who lives on a mountain. God indeed does live in these woods. He doesn't just dwell in a temple made with hands. God is infinite, unlike Odin. The modern world retreats from the sacred and denies it. The pagans realize that there is a sacred and that it should be local. We should have local and rooted customs rooted in the real world. But they fail to understand, I think, that Yahweh is not just the God of tribal Israel. This is the word we use to refer to God. There were pagan kings like Harold Bluetooth and others who converted not by the sword, but because they saw value with what they knew to be true about reality in the Christian story. This is a story that encapsulates other stories. So it wasn't always the case that Christians just took pagan local cultures, religious symbols, and co-opted them for power. That's a modernist, Marxist way of seeing history. That did happen on occasion, but to see it all that way, no. There was truth in even Odin's world tree that I think echoes something greater fulfilled in the tree upon which the God of the universe died. There's a stone in which later those who converted to Christianity encapsulated this. They depicted Christ as they understood him in their local culture. This was the clincher for me. For all the stories of dying and rising gods, Osiris or whatnot, there is one that is a historical person. Jesus of Nazareth was a historical person, whatever else you do with him. And the beliefs about his resurrection are not centuries later, copied and pasted from pagan myths. I would say that the pagan myths were shadowy echoes of the thing that was to come. Jesus was a historical person that actually lived, was actually crucified, and I believe actually rose again. If you read Tolkien's version of the Volsung saga, you'll see a lot of similarities between Siegfried and Christ. This heroic figure that goes out to fight the dragon, but Siegfried died. In the true story, I think, Christ died, but he rose again. And by this, God, by power, declared him to be the Son of God. And he started a church that, yes, we have rites, or you can call them rituals, things that are demanded of us as Christ followers. We're to take up our cross and follow him. And I think what so many of you are rejecting, I reject too, and that is this modernized, business-like, consumerized, vapid Christianity. As kindly as I know how, I'd like to encourage you, just friend to friend, man to man, person to person, repent, believe the gospel of Christ. Be baptized, every one of you, for the remission of sins. But whatever you believe, whatever you do, I hope you know your life matters. God genuinely loves you. So as hard as things get, don't check out early, okay? Live your life, live it to the fullest. Maybe go outside, get some fresh air. As always, thanks for watching. God bless.